Hi guys, so I'll be doing a 4-part video series using Neko Deco Craft Shop's molds. These molds you can find on their website. For this first video, I will be using the game console mold, and they have two different versions. One has a slightly larger screen. These molds are the perfect size to use your trading cards, and as you can see, there's a curve to the mold, so you will have to use a corner punch so that your card fits perfectly. Before you start, you want to make sure you have the right protective equipment. Resin is a chemical, so you want to make sure you're taking the proper precautions. You want to make sure you're using nitrile gloves, and you will also need a respirator. You want to make sure that it's for organic vapors. For this tutorial, I will be using Art and Glow resin. This is my go-to resin. You will also need a measuring cup so that you accurately get the right amount of resin, and hardener so that it cures properly. You want to make sure you're mixing your resin slowly to minimize air bubbles, and when you start mixing your resin, it'll become cloudy, but once it's thoroughly mixed, it will become clear again. If your resin has a lot of air bubbles, you want to let it sit for about 2 to 5 minutes so that it can naturally degas. And once the bubbles rise to the top, you can use a lighter to pop them. If you're doing a colored pour, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about their micro bubbles because you won't be able to see them. I use powdered pigments to color my resin. You can also use liquid pigments or even acrylic paint. You do want to make sure if you're using acrylic paint that you use it sparingly, because if you add too much, it could affect the curing of your resin. And here, as you can see, my resin was getting a bit thick because it was towards the end of my pour. You want to be sure that you don't take too long, because as time passes, your resin will start to thicken and it'll start to cure. Each resin formula is different, so you want to be sure you're checking what the working time is. Also, depending on how hot your room is, or if it's summertime, it can cause the resin to cure faster. If your resin is getting too thick and you notice that it's not really mixing together, you can always go back with a toothpick and mix them. After the first layer, you want to make sure you let it cure for a few hours so that it's tacky but not fluid anymore. Then you can move on to the clear layer. You want to make sure that it spreads evenly but not too thick. As soon as you do the clear layer, you can add the trading card you want. Make sure you insert it at an angle and push from the bottom up so that you can make sure there's no trapped air bubbles. Once your trading card is fully submerged, you want to make sure you let that layer fully cure before you do the back layer so that it doesn't seep into the front layer. After 24 hours, you can demold your piece, and this is how mine turned out. For the cavities where the buttons are, you can leave them as is and fill them with a clear layer of resin, or you can also do a colored layer of resin. For this step, I use UV resin since it's faster. You can also use epoxy resin as well, but you will have to wait a full 24 hours for that to cure. To seal your shaker, you will need clear film. You can find some at craft stores. I found this pack at Hobby Lobby, or you can use transparency sheets. I got these from Amazon. For this step, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to make sure that you're tracing the outline of the shape. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit bigger than the cavity, because you're going to be cutting it down to size. And when you're cutting it, you want to make sure you're double checking that it's not smaller than the actual cavity. You can fill your shaker with anything you want. You can use clay slices, glitter, sprinkles, rhinestones, or even smaller charms. To seal your shaker, you want to use UV resin around the cavity, but make sure you leave a small corner without any UV resin so that you could insert your syringe. And you want to carefully place the clear film and make sure that it's completely coated with the UV resin and there are no gaps. Then you can cure it. To fill the shaker, I use baby oil. You don't want to use water because the water can eventually go bad inside the shaker, and you will also need a syringe to fill it. You carefully want to lift the corner where there's no UV resin and insert your syringe and slowly start to fill your shaker. You don't want to be too rough because you can accidentally lift the film or cause it to burst. When you're done filling your shaker, you want to make sure you clean off any of the excess oil, and then you want to add more UV resin to seal the corner off and cure it thoroughly. Once your shaker is fully cured, you want to take some alcohol wipes and make sure that the surface is completely clear of any excess oil, and this is how your shaker will look. The final step will be to dome your shaker so that it is completely sealed. I will use liquid latex to protect my piece from any resin overspill. I apply it to the sides and then I apply it to the back as well so that I can protect that layer when I'm doming the front and vice versa. After you apply the liquid latex, you want to make sure you let it completely dry. If you're doing multiple pieces, you want to make sure that they don't touch because they will fuse together with the liquid latex. Doming is essentially adding a clear layer, which is the final step and also the most important step. You want to make sure you add it evenly, and once it's fully coated, you can use a lighter to pop any excess bubbles, and you really want to make sure you babysit this. You also want to use a clear container to cover them to make sure that no dust particles land on them while it's curing. After 24 hours, your piece will be cured and you can remove the liquid latex and then you'll have your finished piece. I hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial and happy crafting!